The night was young, and the Monroe Hotel's newest luxury location shimmered with elegance and excess. The grand ballroom was adorned with chandeliers that bathed the polished marble floors in a golden glow. A live jazz band played softly in the background, their notes drifting effortlessly through the air. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled, laughter and clinking glasses filling the room. It was the perfect evening, a testament to Chris Monroe's success. Amidst the crowd, Cynthia Evans, her uniform too tight around the waist, maneuvered through the sea of well-dressed people. She tried to keep her head down, balancing a silver tray in one hand as she weaved through the guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The job wasn't glamorous, but the overtime pay was necessary. Raising two boys alone didn't leave room for much else, and she had learned to survive on less. The pressure of the event weighed heavily on Cynthia, but she did her best to ignore the flirtatious comments and rude remarks. In a room full of affluence, she felt invisible, but in her world, that was often the best place to be. She didn't belong among these people, but the money from this event would help pay for another month's rent, more groceries, and the boys' school fees. Chris Monroe stood at the center of the room, holding court like the king he was. His associates surrounded him, laughing, smiling, and congratulating him on the opening. But as he looked around the ballroom, his eyes landed on Cynthia. Something about her caught his attention. There was a quiet grace about her, an invisible strength that intrigued him. He couldn't place it, but he knew he had seen her before. Without thinking, he made his way toward the bar where Cynthia was placing drinks on a tray. He paused for a moment, watching her, then casually approached. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth. "Can I get a drink, or should I just wait for you to bring me one?" Cynthia turned, startled by his presence. For a moment her heart raced, but she quickly regained her composure. She recognized him immediately. Chris Monroe, the man who had disappeared without a trace 5 years ago after a night she would never forget. "Mr. Monroe," she said, keeping her voice even, "I wasn't expecting you to stop by. What can I get you?" Chris smiled, intrigued by her calmness. "Just a scotch, please." As Cynthia poured the drink, she tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. He hadn't noticed her in years, and now here he was, standing in front of her, asking for a drink as if nothing had happened. Nothing had changed for him, but everything had changed for her. But as Chris took the drink, something caught his eye. The boys sitting at a corner table were talking and laughing. Something about them made his heart skip a beat. They looked familiar. As Chris Monroe stood staring at the twins, his mind raced. Ezekiel and Caleb were chatting away at the corner table, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around them. The resemblance between the boys and himself was uncanny, a mirror image of his own features, only smaller, younger. Chris shook his head, dismissing the thought at first, but it lingered. No, it couldn't be, he thought. It's impossible. But the longer he watched them, the more something gnawed at him. There was something familiar about their laughter, their mannerisms, the way they carried themselves. Could they be his children? His heart pounded in his chest, and he turned away from the scene at the bar, trying to gather his thoughts. Cynthia was walking back toward the kitchen, her face tense. Her body language spoke volumes. She was trying to avoid him. Chris had never been one to chase after women. He was used to getting what he wanted, whether it was in business or personal life. But there was something about Cynthia that intrigued him, a sense of mystery that made him want to know more. She seemed to sense his gaze on her because she quickened her pace, disappearing into the kitchen before Chris could say another word. He sighed and turned back toward the twins, the question growing louder in his mind. Could it be true? Had Cynthia kept this from him all these years? He couldn't shake the idea. He needed answers. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Chris found himself standing by the balcony, staring out at the city skyline. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts: business, the hotel opening, the people he'd met tonight. But above all, his thoughts kept circling back to the woman he had met years ago in a similar ballroom, and the children he was now certain were his. Cynthia Evans, he whispered to himself. What was she hiding? The more Chris thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly knew about her. They had shared a night of passion, yes, but after that night, she had vanished. He had tried to contact her once or twice, but all his efforts were in vain. There was no trace of her anywhere. Now here she was, working as a waitress at one of his hotel events, and those two boys. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in his mind, but the final image remained blurry. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Cynthia was trying to compose herself. Her heart was pounding. She had seen Chris Monroe, the man she never thought she would see again. And now he was asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. As she scrubbed the countertops, her mind replayed that one night 5 years ago. The night that had changed everything. She had been young, vulnerable, and full of dreams. Chris had been kind to her, but their encounter had been fleeting. He hadn't wanted more than that, and she hadn't expected it. But then the pregnancy test came back positive and everything shifted. She had made the decision to raise the twins alone, never telling Chris about their existence. The idea of reaching out to him, of confronting him with the truth, had terrified her. She had no idea how he would react, or if he would even care. But now, 5 years later, seeing him again, the old wounds were reopening. The questions she had avoided for so long were now unavoidable. What if he knows? What if he's figured it out? Cynthia's thoughts were interrupted when a voice called out from the kitchen door. Cynthia! She turned to see one of her colleagues, a fellow server, standing in the doorway. You okay? The woman asked, sensing the tension in her friend's face. Yeah, just tired, Cynthia replied, trying to smile. It's been a long night. But the woman wasn't buying it. I saw Chris Monroe talking to you. You're not really just tired, are you? Cynthia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know, the woman shrugged. It just seemed like there was something more. You too. There's a history, isn't there? Cynthia froze, her hands trembling. She couldn't deny it anymore. The truth was slipping through her fingers, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. She didn't want to talk about it, not yet, but she knew the woman's question had only made her fears worse. I have to go, Cynthia muttered, grabbing her things and walking quickly toward the exit. Back in the ballroom, Chris watched Cynthia leave the kitchen with a tense look on her face. She was avoiding him again, and it only made his curiosity grow. He wasn't used to being brushed off like this, and something told him that there was more to this story than he had realized. He turned to his business associate Marcus, who was nearby. Who is that woman? Chris asked, trying to sound casual. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Cynthia Evans? She's one of the servers here. I think she works a lot of events for us, but she's not really one to get involved in the social scene. Quiet type. Keeps to herself. Chris nodded, his thoughts racing. He had to get to the bottom of this. The twins, Cynthia, and the undeniable connection that seemed to be pulling him back into her life. As Chris stepped outside for some fresh air, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his private investigator. Found something interesting. You might want to know. His heart skipped a beat. What could it be? He opened the message and scanned the details, his eyes widening as the pieces finally clicked together. The investigator had dug into Cynthia's background and found a trail of documents, medical records, legal filings, and birth certificates, all leading back to the same truth. Cynthia Evans had 2 children, and the father, Chris Monroe. Cynthia sat in the small apartment she called home, her mind spinning. The twins were asleep in their room, exhausted from their day at school. She glanced over at their crayon drawings on the refrigerator, their proud little works of art. Ezekiel and Caleb were her world, and she had worked so hard to shield them from the pain of their unknown father. But tonight, everything was unraveling. She had hoped for so long that she could keep her past hidden from them, that they would grow up without needing to know about their father, the man who had disappeared after one night, the man who had never known they existed. But now, as the days passed and Chris kept coming into her life, she could feel the walls closing in. She had to tell him. She had to tell him everything. The boys had started asking questions about their father, their curiosity growing by the day. Cynthia had been dodging the topic for as long as possible, but she knew the day was coming when they would demand answers. The next day, Cynthia received a message from Chris. He wanted to meet. No longer could she avoid the inevitable. Her past was about to meet her present, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. As she stared at the message on her phone, she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. What would Chris say when he found out the truth? What would the boys think of him? And most importantly, could she ever trust him enough to let him be a part of their lives? Cynthia stood in front of her bathroom mirror, running a hand through her hair. The anticipation was unbearable. She had agreed to meet Chris, but now that the moment had arrived, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. There had been so many years of silence between them, so many unanswered questions. What if she couldn't control the conversation? What if he got angry or worse, indifferent? Her reflection stared back at her, unsure, conflicted. She didn't know how to face him, not after everything. But deep down, she knew this was the only way forward. With a deep breath, Cynthia grabbed her purse and stepped out of her apartment, locking the door behind her. She wasn't going to let her fear dictate the future. Chris was already at the small cafe they had agreed to meet at. He sat in the corner booth, his eyes scanning the room, his fingers drumming impatiently on the table. He had waited 5 years for this moment, and now that it was finally happening, he wasn't sure what to expect. He saw her walk in, her eyes scanning the room nervously. She spotted him, and their gazes locked for a brief moment before she walked over. Cynthia sat down opposite him, her posture tense. She didn't know how to start the conversation. Chris, on the other hand, looked like he had 100 questions but was trying to keep his cool. "You look good," he said, trying to break the silence with a compliment. His voice was smooth, casual, but there was an edge to it, as though he were holding back something. "Thanks," Cynthia muttered, her gaze flicking to the menu in front of her, though she wasn't really looking at it. I wasn't sure what you wanted to talk about, so here we are." Chris leaned forward, his expression serious now. "I think you know what I want to talk about, Cynthia. The twins. Ezekiel and Caleb. They're mine, aren't they?" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to come out with it so directly. She had thought maybe they would ease into it, but Chris wasn't the type for subtlety. I didn't want to tell you," Cynthia said quietly, her fingers nervously twisting the napkin in front of her. "I didn't think it was necessary. You didn't want anything more than that night, and I respected that. I didn't want to complicate things for you for them." Chris' gaze softened slightly, but his jaw was tight. "You didn't think it was necessary? Cynthia, those are my kids. I'm not asking for your forgiveness or an apology, but I deserve to know them. They deserve to know me." Cynthia felt a pang of guilt hit her chest. She hadn't expected him to react like this, but a part of her understood why he was angry. She had kept this from him for so long, and she could see that it had hurt him. "I know," she whispered, "but I didn't want them to grow up with someone who might leave again. I didn't want them to have that kind of disappointment. I did what I thought was best." Chris let out a long sigh, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I get it," he said, his voice low. "I get why you did it, but I'm not that guy anymore. I'm not the one-night stand, the guy who walks away. I want to be a part of their lives, Cynthia." Cynthia's heart skipped a beat at his words. She wanted to believe him, but there was so much fear and uncertainty in her. She had spent so many years raising the twins on her own, shielding them from the reality of their father's absence. The idea of Chris suddenly stepping into their lives felt both comforting and terrifying. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You can't just waltz in and expect everything to be perfect. They've never known you, Chris. They don't know you at all." "I know," Chris replied, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I'm not asking for perfection, Cynthia. I'm asking for a chance. I want to be there for them, for you. It's not just about being their father. It's about being part of their lives. I don't want to be a stranger anymore." There was a long pause as Cynthia absorbed his words. It was everything she had wanted to hear but had been too afraid to hope for. Could she really allow him into their world? Could she trust him not to hurt them again? The conversation shifted to more practical matters as Chris and Cynthia spoke about the logistics of introducing him to the twins. She was reluctant, but Chris was patient, understanding the gravity of the situation. She explained how they had always been her responsibility, how she had never wanted anyone else to disrupt their lives. "I'm not trying to replace you as their mother," Chris said gently, "but I want to be a part of this. I want to make up for lost time." Cynthia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for all of this, but the thought of her children knowing their father, of having that connection with him, made something stir deep inside her. Maybe this could work. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let the past go and allow Chris into their lives. A few days later, Cynthia finally agreed to let Chris meet the twins. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. They were just 5 years old, still so innocent, still so unaware of the complexities of the world. How would they react to this stranger who looked like them, who claimed to be their father? Cynthia sat nervously in the living room of her apartment as the doorbell rang. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She could hear the boys playing in their room, their laughter filling the apartment. She didn't know if they would even understand what was happening. They were so young, but they were smart. And Chris was a force of nature. How would he fit into their world? When she opened the door, there stood Chris, looking every bit the businessman he was, dressed in a casual suit. His usual confident demeanor softened with a hint of nervousness. "Hey!" he said, his voice a little unsure. You ready? Yeah, Cynthia replied, though she wasn't sure if she was ready at all. The twins emerged from their room, their eyes wide as they saw Chris standing there. They looked up at their mother, then back at the man in front of them. Mom, Ezekiel asked, his voice hesitant. Who's he? Cynthia took a deep breath. Boys, this is your dad. There was a long silence. The twins stared at Chris, and then at each other, their expressions unreadable. Chris knelt down to their level, offering a tentative smile. Hi, I'm Chris. I'm your father. Ezekiel and Caleb looked at him curiously, their eyes flicking between their mother and this man who looked so much like them. Slowly, Caleb took a step forward, his small hand reaching out to Chris. Are you really our dad? Caleb asked, his voice innocent but filled with uncertainty. Chris looked up at Cynthia, his heart in his throat. He could see the worry in her eyes, the fear of this moment not going well. But as Caleb's hand reached for him, something inside Chris shifted. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about these boys, his sons, who had been waiting for a father all this time. I am, Chris replied softly, taking Caleb's hand gently. And I'm going to make sure you never have to wonder again. Cynthia watched as the moment unfolded before her, her heart aching but also swelling with hope. She didn't know what the future would hold, but maybe, just maybe, they could build something together. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning. As Chris spent more time with the twins, he began to see the challenges of fatherhood that he had never considered before. He had always been focused on his business empire, on growing his wealth and status. But these children, his children, were teaching him something he had never known. The value of patience, the depth of unconditional love. For Cynthia, the process was slower. She still had her reservations, still couldn't fully let go of the past. Every time she watched Chris interact with Ezekiel and Caleb, a part of her wanted to pull back, to keep him at arm's length. She had raised them on her own, and it was hard to relinquish control. But she was also beginning to see a side of Chris that she hadn't expected. He wasn't the same man who had disappeared all those years ago. He was trying, and that meant something. As they navigated this new reality, one thing became clear. The road ahead would be full of challenges. But Cynthia, Chris, and the twins had a chance to create something new, something stronger. The story of their journey was just beginning. And as they stepped forward together, they faced the uncertain future with hope, determination, and the possibility of a family rebuilt from the pieces of the past. The days following Chris's first meeting with the twins were filled with uncertainty. Cynthia couldn't deny that she was seeing a different side of him, one that was more patient, more present. But she also couldn't ignore the growing discomfort she felt each time the twins asked questions about their father, or when Chris seemed eager to spend more time with them. It was as if she was watching her own world shift, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The small apartment she had shared with Ezekiel and Caleb for 5 years suddenly felt too cramped, too fragile for the changes that were happening. Could this really work? Could Chris Monroe, the man who had once been a fleeting presence in her life, really become a part of their family? One evening, as the boys played with their toys in the living room, Cynthia found herself sitting by the window, watching the city lights flicker outside. The world beyond seemed so vast, and she felt small, uncertain. Chris had been calling more often, asking to visit, suggesting outings. He had even invited them to his luxurious penthouse in the heart of the city, something that made Cynthia uneasy. How could she go from raising her children in a modest apartment to stepping into his world of wealth and power? She didn't know if she was ready for the differences, the complications that came with it. But the truth was she couldn't keep the boys from the reality of who their father was. They were growing older, and their curiosity was getting harder to deny. They asked about Chris all the time. "When's he coming over again, Mom?" Ezekiel would ask with a hopeful smile. "Why didn't he take us to the zoo?" Caleb would wonder aloud, watching as Chris posted pictures of his luxury vacations on social media. To them, Chris was still a mystery, a figure who existed on the other side of their lives, someone who only seemed to appear in pieces, never fully there. Cynthia wanted to protect them, to shield them from the complexities of her own emotions, but she knew it was time for the truth. The world she had built for them, the carefully crafted illusion of a single-parent family, was starting to crack. It was time to face reality, even if she wasn't sure she was ready. A few days later, Cynthia found herself standing in front of the elevator doors, waiting to meet Chris at his penthouse. The boys were with her, chattering excitedly about the idea of seeing where their dad lived. Cynthia couldn't help but notice how eager they were. They had never experienced anything like this before. When the elevator finally arrived, she hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. She could feel her heart racing, the weight of the moment pressing on her. The elevator ascended swiftly, and soon they were standing outside Chris's door. Before she could knock, the door opened, revealing Chris with a wide, welcoming smile. He stepped aside to let them in, and Cynthia noticed the luxurious interior. Gleaming floors, towering windows with a breathtaking view of the city, and modern furniture that screamed wealth. "Wow," Ezekiel muttered, his eyes wide as he took in the grandeur. Chris chuckled. "It's a little much, huh?" He stepped forward, crouching to their level. "But it's yours to explore. Come on in." Cynthia followed behind the twins, her anxiety growing with each step. She had never been in a place like this before, and it made her feel even more out of place. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself or her children. But as she watched Chris interact with the boys, her doubts began to soften. He seemed genuinely excited to share his world with them. He led them through the expansive living area, showing them his collection of books and artwork, even taking them to the rooftop terrace to watch the sunset. For a moment, Cynthia allowed herself to relax, to see Chris as more than just a businessman. She saw him as a father trying to connect with his children in the only way he knew how. But the guilt still gnawed at her. Could she trust him? Could she let go of her control and allow him into their lives completely? Later that evening, as they were leaving Chris's penthouse, Cynthia was silent. The twins were exhausted, but their excitement had been palpable all day. As they entered the elevator, they chattered away, recounting every detail of the visit. "Mom, can we go back soon?" Caleb asked, his eyes sparkling. "Yeah, Dad's house is cool," Ezekiel added. "We even got to play with his fancy toys." Cynthia smiled weakly but didn't respond immediately. Her mind was too clouded. When they arrived back at the apartment, the twins rushed to their room, eager to tell each other more about their adventure. Cynthia sat down on the couch, staring at the floor. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Chris. "I really enjoyed today. I hope they did too. We should do this again soon." She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she let the message hang in the air, as she tried to gather her thoughts. She knew that letting Chris into their lives meant opening up to a future she wasn't sure she was ready for. The reality of co-parenting, of building a life together for their children, was far more complicated than she had imagined. Could she trust him to stick around this time? Or would he leave as he had done before? These questions filled her mind, and for the first time in years, Cynthia found herself facing the uncertainty of her future. In the weeks that followed, Chris's presence in their lives grew more frequent. He visited the apartment more often, spending time with the twins and even helping with small things around the house. It was a far cry from the man Cynthia had met all those years ago, the man who had left her with nothing but a memory. But as time passed, Cynthia began to feel the tension between them. It wasn't just the worry about her children's future. It was the unresolved emotions that lingered between her and Chris. She had buried her feelings for so long, convinced that she could do it all on her own. But now, as Chris was slowly becoming a more permanent part of their lives, Cynthia realized that there were things they needed to talk about, things she had avoided for far too long. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, watching the twins play with their new toys, Cynthia decided it was time to bring up the subject that had been gnawing at her for weeks. "Chris," she began, her voice hesitant, "we need to talk." He looked up from the game he was playing with the twins, his expression curious but attentive. "What's on your mind?" Cynthia paused, trying to find the right words. "I know you're trying. I know you want to be a part of their lives, but what happens next? What do we do now?" Chris sat up straighter, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm not going anywhere, Cynthia. You don't have to worry about that. I want to be here for you and for the boys, but I also want to make sure you're okay with it. I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She had expected him to be more eager, more focused on his own desires, but instead he was listening, really listening to her. "I'm just scared," Cynthia admitted, her voice small. "I've built this life for the twins and me, and now everything's changing. I don't know how to let go of the control I've had for so long. And I don't know if I can trust you to stick around this time." Chris reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I get it. And I'm not asking for you to trust me overnight. But I am asking for a chance to prove that I can be there. For you, for the boys. I'm not perfect, but I'm here, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The words hung in the air between them, and Cynthia realized something. She wasn't ready to let go completely, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to let Chris in a little more. Over the next few months, Chris continued to spend time with the twins, slowly earning their trust. They were still a little hesitant around him, but there was no denying that they were beginning to form a bond. As for Cynthia, she found herself opening up more, allowing Chris to be part of their everyday lives. They began to work as a family, even if it was a work in progress. Cynthia learned to let go of some of her control, trusting Chris more with the decisions that affected their lives. The twins, meanwhile, enjoyed the new dynamic, their smiles growing wider each time Chris came over. But Cynthia knew that they were far from being a perfect family. There would be struggles, there would be bumps in the road, but they were moving forward together. And that was enough for now. As the weeks turned into months, Cynthia realized that sometimes the future was uncertain, but it didn't have to be perfect. What mattered was that they were together, Chris, Cynthia, Ezekiel, and Caleb, building something new out of the pieces of their past. And in that moment, Cynthia finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps they could make it work. One evening, as they sat down to dinner at the apartment, the twins laughed together as Chris told a silly joke. Cynthia watched them, her heart full. She hadn't expected this life, but it was the one she had now, and it was more than she could have hoped for. For the first time in years, Cynthia allowed herself to relax, to enjoy the quiet moments with her family. There was still so much to learn, so much to navigate, but for the first time she felt hopeful about the future. Chris turned to her, his eyes soft. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Cynthia smiled, looking at him, then at the boys and finally back at Chris. I think we're going to be okay." And as the evening stretched on, the sound of their laughter filling the room, Cynthia realized that sometimes, the hardest part of a new beginning was simply taking that first step. But with Chris, with the boys, she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together. As spring began to melt the chill of winter, the days grew longer, and the weight of change in Cynthia's life felt heavier. Things had been going well with Chris, but beneath the surface, there were moments when she caught herself withdrawing. She wasn't entirely sure what caused it. Was it the fear of getting hurt again? The lingering doubt that this wasn't what she wanted? Or perhaps even the realization that this new life wasn't as easy as she had hoped it would be? One afternoon, as the twins played in the park with Chris, Cynthia found herself alone at the apartment, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea in hand. Her mind wandered back to the first time she and Chris had met. Their one-night stand that turned into a pregnancy and ultimately led to this complicated relationship. In the beginning, she had been so sure of what she wanted, so focused on her goals, raising the twins, keeping a roof over their heads, and making sure they never felt the sting of abandonment. But now, with Chris in their lives, everything had changed. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crack. And though she told herself that it was a good thing, a part of her resisted. She wasn't sure if she could fully embrace the idea of a family with him. Was she really ready for it? Could she trust him enough to let him be the father the boys deserved? As the afternoon faded into evening, Chris returned with the twins, laughing as they rushed into the apartment. "Mom, look what Dad got us," Ezekiel said, holding up a new board game, his face alight with excitement. Cynthia smiled faintly but remained seated on the couch, still lost in thought. Chris noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. He had gotten better at reading her over the past few months, and today something felt off. "Hey," he said, kneeling beside her. "What's going on? You've been quiet all afternoon." Cynthia hesitated before answering. "I don't know, Chris. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this change." Chris sat down next to her, his expression soft. "What do you mean? You've been doing great. We've been doing great. But I've been doing it alone for so long," she said quietly. "And now that you're here, I don't know how to share this. I don't know how to let go of the control I've had." Chris took her hand in his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. "I'm not here to take control, Cynthia. I'm here to be part of this, to help, to be with you and the boys. But I can't do that if you don't let me in." Cynthia's heart ached with the honesty in his voice. She had been holding on to her fears, her insecurities, afraid that this could all fall apart if she let herself believe in it. But maybe, just maybe, she had to stop running from the possibility of a new beginning. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of letting you in, of trusting you. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can trust that this isn't just another thing that will fall apart." Chris's gaze softened. "I'm not going anywhere, Cynthia. I'm here for the long haul. For you. For the boys. I've made mistakes in the past, but I'm not that man anymore." The sincerity in his eyes made Cynthia's breath catch in her throat. She had spent so long convincing herself that she could do everything on her own, that she didn't need anyone else, that she had built walls around her heart to protect herself. But Chris was breaking through those walls, and as much as she wanted to resist, she knew deep down that she didn't want to. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Okay, let's try. Let's see where this goes." And just like that, the heavy weight she had been carrying seemed to lighten, if only slightly. It wasn't going to be easy, she knew that. But maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. She could make this work. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of discovery and learning. Cynthia and Chris had begun to find their rhythm together. But it wasn't without challenges. The twins, though they had accepted Chris into their lives, still had their moments of uncertainty. There were days when they would ask questions about their father, wondering aloud why he hadn't been there for them from the beginning. Chris, ever patient, would answer their questions with care, assuring them that he was here now and that he would always be around. He made an effort to be involved in their everyday lives, from school pickups to bedtime stories. And slowly, the boys began to warm up to him more, their trust in him growing with each passing day. For Cynthia, the change was more gradual. She was still navigating her own fears and insecurities, but with Chris by her side, she was beginning to see that perhaps it was okay to rely on someone else. It wasn't easy, but she was learning to share the responsibility of parenting, of building a life together. However, the old wounds were never far from the surface. One evening, as she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, Cynthia came across an old picture of her and Chris, taken during one of their rare, carefree moments before everything had changed. She stared at it for a long time, a sense of nostalgia and pain washing over her. The carefree days before the pregnancy, before the rejection. Those days felt so distant now, so unreachable. Chris noticed her staring at the photo and sat beside her. "You okay?" Cynthia nodded, though her heart was heavy. I don't know if I can forget what happened. What you did." Chris's face grew serious, and he gently took her hand. I know I hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. But I can't change the past, Cynthia. I can only show you who I am now, and I am here. I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes welled with tears as she looked at him, the weight of everything they had been through crashing down on her all at once. She had loved him once, and though it had been tainted by his absence, a part of her still cared for him. But could she truly forgive him? Could she forgive herself for loving someone who had walked away? "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said, her voice breaking. "But I'm trying. I'm really trying, Chris." He nodded, understanding the depth of her pain. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for the chance to show you that I can be the man you and the boys need." It was the beginning of summer when Cynthia began to feel like she was finally starting to get a grip on this new reality. Chris had become an integral part of their lives, and the twins were thriving with the added presence of their father. The bond between them was growing, though it was still fragile in places. There were still moments of tension, times when Cynthia's doubts resurfaced, but they were learning to navigate them together. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, laughing and sharing stories about their day, Cynthia felt a surge of gratitude. This wasn't perfect. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was theirs. And in that moment she felt a quiet sense of peace, the kind she hadn't felt in years. As the evening drew to a close, Chris stood up to help clear the table, and the twins headed to bed, tired from their busy day. Cynthia watched him for a moment, her heart full. Despite everything, despite the doubts and fears, she realized something. She didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to have everything figured out. For the first time, Cynthia believed in the possibility of a future together, one step at a time. And as the night fell, with the city lights twinkling in the distance, Cynthia knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. There were more challenges ahead, more hurdles to overcome, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face them together. The weeks rolled by, each one bringing Cynthia closer to an understanding of what her new life with Chris and the twins might look like. Yet, beneath the surface, there was still a part of her that remained guarded. She had allowed herself to let Chris in, but there were still walls around her heart that no one, not even him, had breached. She wasn't sure if she was just being cautious, or if something deeper held her back. It was a Tuesday evening when everything began to unravel. Cynthia had just finished her shift at the Monroe Hotel, her body exhausted from the long hours of serving high-end guests, carrying trays of champagne, and answering the constant flow of questions from well-dressed strangers who didn't seem to notice her fatigue. It had been another one of those nights where she had barely a moment to breathe. Chris had offered to pick up the twins from school, giving her a rare chance to wind down. She unlocked the door to her apartment and walked inside, the silence settling around her like a blanket. The smell of dinner still lingered in the air, and the soft sound of a television could be heard from the living room. The twins were sitting cross-legged on the floor, their faces lit up by the glow of their favorite cartoon. Chris was on the couch, his gaze lost in thought, his fingers absently flipping through the pages of a business magazine. "Hey," Cynthia said, kicking off her shoes and dropping her bag on the entryway table. "You guys okay?" The twins barely looked up from their show, but Chris glanced at her, offering a small smile. "Long day." She nodded, walking into the kitchen to grab a drink. The weight of her tiredness seemed to press on her more than usual. She had been feeling overwhelmed lately, between the twins, her job, and trying to figure out what her relationship with Chris was really becoming. There was hardly any room to think clearly. Chris, noticing her distant expression, put down his magazine and stood up. He crossed the room to her, his voice low. "Cynthia, can we talk?" She turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat. She knew the tone of his voice, serious, careful, almost like he was treading on fragile ground. She put down her glass and wiped her hands on her jeans, trying to steady herself. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about us," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "About everything. And I need to be honest with you." Cynthia's stomach clenched. Honesty. She had been craving it from him, but a part of her was scared of what he might say. The truth had a way of complicating things, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the complexity of their situation. "What's on your mind?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Chris took a deep breath before continuing. "I know I've hurt you in the past, and I've tried my best to show you that I'm here now. But there's something I haven't told you. Something important." The moment stretched, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Cynthia's heart beat faster, her mind racing as she tried to prepare for what he might say. "What is it?" she whispered. Chris looked away briefly, gathering his thoughts before speaking again. "I'm not just here for you and the boys, Cynthia. I'm here because I want more than this. I want us to have a future together. But there's something you need to know about me. About my past." Cynthia's mind reeled. Was he talking about his past relationships? His history with other women? The fear that had been buried deep within her started to rise to the surface. She had always known that Chris had a life before her, but she had never fully understood the depth of it. The past was always there, lurking in the shadows, and now it was threatening to pull them apart. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then met her gaze again. "I've been keeping something from you, Cynthia. I didn't want to complicate things, but I think you need to know. Before I met you, I was married." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Cynthia felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "Married?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "You were married?" Chris nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "Yes, I was married, but it was a long time ago. We divorced years before we ever met. I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered. I thought we could start fresh, but now I see that keeping it from you, it just wasn't right." Cynthia's mind whirled as she processed the information. She had known there was something off about Chris, some part of his life that he wasn't sharing, but this was bigger than anything she had imagined. Her thoughts turned to the twins, Ezekiel and Caleb. They had always asked about their father, about his family. Now everything felt like a lie. "You never mentioned this before," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied, his expression pained. "I was trying to protect you. I thought it would make things easier if I just focused on us. But I can't keep hiding from the truth. I owe it to you and the boys to be open." Cynthia stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. Her emotions were a jumble. Anger, confusion, betrayal, and something else she couldn't quite name. She had been trying so hard to make this work, to believe in the possibility of a future with Chris, and now this? The trust she had slowly been rebuilding felt like it was crumbling before her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why wait until now?" Chris stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. "I didn't want to complicate things. I wanted us to be happy, without the baggage of my past. But I see now that I've made a mistake." Cynthia pulled away from him, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything. "How could you keep something like that from me? You're telling me now after everything." Chris's face hardened with regret, but he didn't back down. "I'm sorry, Cynthia. I should have been honest with you from the start." Silence fell between them as Cynthia struggled to process everything she had just heard. She wanted to be angry, to demand answers, but part of her knew that this was just another piece of the complicated puzzle that was her life with Chris. Another wound she would have to heal. The sound of the twins' laughter from the other room seemed to pull her back to reality. She couldn't let this break her. She couldn't let it destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. "I need time," Cynthia said quietly, her voice steady now. "I need time to think." Chris nodded, stepping back, giving her space. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. But when you're ready, I'll be here." Cynthia watched him for a moment before turning and walking toward the bedroom, her mind swirling with questions, doubts, and fears. The future was uncertain, and the past was always there, lurking in the shadows, threatening to unravel everything. But as she closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed, she realized one thing. She couldn't keep running from the truth, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. The days following Chris's revelation felt like a slow, suffocating fog had descended over Cynthia's life. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, suffusing everything with uncertainty. She wasn't sure how to navigate the labyrinth of emotions that had taken root in her heart: anger, confusion, betrayal. But beneath all of that, there was a quiet, unspoken fear. The fear of losing the fragile connection they had built, the fear of not being able to trust him again. Chris had given her the space she needed, but the tension between them was palpable, thick with unspoken words. Each day, Cynthia tried to go through the motions, focusing on the twins, her job, and everything else that needed attention. But the question that gnawed at her was the one she couldn't seem to escape. Was she ready to forgive him? On a particularly quiet evening after the twins had gone to bed, Cynthia found herself once again alone with her thoughts. The apartment was still, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if the house itself was waiting for her to make a decision. The faint hum of the city outside filtered through the window, but inside, the world felt strangely silent. She sat on the couch, a cup of tea in hand, staring blankly at the television. The flickering light from the screen cast shadows across the room, adding to the weight of her thoughts. She had spent the past few days trying to convince herself that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that maybe Chris's past didn't matter, that the love they shared was enough to overcome the secrets that had been kept from her. But every time she thought about it, about his marriage, about his lies, it felt like a knot tightening in her chest. Why didn't he tell her sooner? She wondered. What else was he hiding? The sound of the door opening broke her from her thoughts. Chris walked into the room, his presence filling the space as he paused at the threshold, looking at her with an expression of quiet concern. He had been distant, giving her the space she'd asked for, but tonight, it seemed like he could no longer remain in the silence. "You're still up," he said softly, his voice gentle. Cynthia looked up, meeting his gaze. The warmth she once felt for him was still there, buried beneath the layers of confusion and pain. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I've been thinking." Chris nodded and stepped into the room, sitting beside her on the couch. The weight of his presence felt both comforting and overwhelming at the same time. He didn't say anything at first, just waited for her to speak, to let out whatever was trapped in her mind. "Chris," Cynthia began, her voice quiet but firm, "I need to know why. Why didn't you tell me about your marriage? Why did you keep it from me for so long?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, as though he had been preparing for this conversation for days. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought if I kept it hidden, maybe it would be easier for us to move forward. I didn't want to bring up my past because I didn't want it to affect what we had. But I see now that I was wrong. I should have told you from the beginning. You deserve to know." Cynthia shook her head, feeling the sting of his words. "But you kept this secret from me, Chris, for months. And I don't know how to feel about that." "I know," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I don't expect you to just forgive me. I don't expect you to forget. But I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm not that man anymore. I'm not hiding anything from you now." She stared at him, her mind struggling to process everything. Could she trust him again? Could she move past the lies and the secrecy? "I want to believe you," Cynthia said softly, her voice breaking slightly. "I do. But this is a lot. I don't know if I'm ready to just let it go." Chris's eyes softened and he reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I don't want you to let it go, Cynthia. I just want the chance to prove to you that I'm here for you, that I'm here for us." But I can't do that if you're still carrying this weight. If you're still holding on to the hurt I caused." Cynthia pulled her hand away gently, needing the space to think. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, her heart torn between wanting to forgive him and wanting to protect herself from further pain. The room felt colder, the silence stretching between them as she tried to make sense of everything. Chris, sensing her internal struggle, didn't push. He just sat there waiting for her to speak when she was ready. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she finally whispered, her voice small and vulnerable. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Chris's face fell, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. He had known this moment might come, but hearing her say it, hearing the doubt in her voice, made it feel even harder to bear. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I've hurt you and I don't expect it to be easy. But I will keep trying, Cynthia. I will keep showing you that I'm here. That I want this for you, for the boys, for all of us." Cynthia nodded slowly, her mind a jumble of conflicting emotions. She didn't know where to go from here. The fear of the unknown, of opening herself up again to someone who had hurt her so deeply, held her back. Yet there was still a flicker of hope, a small voice in her heart that whispered that maybe, just maybe, they could overcome this. For a long time neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared silence was enough to fill the room. Eventually Cynthia stood up, needing the space to breathe. She crossed the room to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights shimmered like stars and the sound of the night air was calming, almost soothing. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Chris," she said, her back to him. "But I need to figure this out. I need to find a way to move forward, whether that means with you or without you." Chris didn't answer right away. He knew that she needed time, and he couldn't rush her into making a decision. He could only wait and hope that in time she would find a way to forgive him, to trust him again. "I'll be here," he said softly. "Whenever you're ready." Cynthia didn't turn around. She just stood there, looking out at the city, as the weight of the night settled in. She didn't have all the answers and she wasn't sure if she ever would. But one thing was certain, this journey wasn't over yet. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for them to rebuild what had been broken. The question was, could they ever truly heal? The days passed slowly for Cynthia. She found herself caught in a constant tug-of-war between hope and doubt. She wanted to believe that she could move forward, that she could forgive Chris for his past and the secrets he had kept. But there was a part of her that was still terrified of repeating her mistakes. She had built a life for herself and her twins, a life that, despite the struggle, felt safe, stable. Could she really allow someone back in? Someone who had so easily betrayed her trust? Chris, for his part, remained patient. He kept his distance, giving her the space she had asked for, but every chance he got, he showed up. Whether it was helping with the twins, running errands, or simply sitting beside her while she worked, offering silent support. It was clear he was trying, but Cynthia was beginning to wonder if it was enough. Could she let herself trust him again? Could they build something real from the remnants of what had been shattered? One afternoon, as the city buzzed outside, Cynthia found herself sitting in the small, cozy corner of her apartment, a cup of tea in hand. The twins were at school, and for the first time in days, she had a quiet moment to herself. It had been a long week of reflection, of considering everything that had happened, Chris's confession, his promises, her own fears. She needed answers. Not from Chris, but from herself. The sound of the doorbell startled her. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and for a moment, a wave of anxiety washed over her. She stood, placing her tea on the kitchen counter, before walking slowly toward the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to see Chris standing on the other side, holding a large bouquet of flowers. His face was serious, yet there was a softness in his eyes that spoke of vulnerability. "I thought I'd stop by," he said, his voice a little hesitant. "I know we're taking things slow, but I wanted to remind you that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, Cynthia. And I know I've messed up, but I'm trying to show you that I'm here for the long haul." Cynthia's heart twisted at the sight of him, looking so sincere, so earnest, but at the same time a flicker of doubt flared inside her. Could he really be here for the long haul? The past felt like an anchor, weighing her down and keeping her from moving forward. "You didn't have to bring flowers," she said quietly, stepping aside to let him in. "You didn't have to do anything." He smiled softly as he stepped into the apartment, holding the bouquet out to her. "I know, but I wanted to. I don't expect forgiveness right away, Cynthia. I just wanted you to know that I'm here. Not just for today or tomorrow, but for however long it takes." Cynthia took the flowers from him, her fingers brushing his. The gesture was simple, yet it was laden with meaning. She could see how hard he was trying, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a stir of warmth in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she had been too harsh on him, but at the same time she couldn't ignore the deep-seated fear that still lingered. Could she really let go of the past and trust him again? "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Chris. You've been honest with me now, but what if there's more that you're hiding? What if this is all just a repeat of the past?" Chris's expression faltered, but he quickly masked it with a look of resolve. "I understand why you feel that way, and I can't promise you that there won't be challenges. But I can promise you that I'm not hiding anything from you now. I'm done with secrets. If you give me the chance, I will prove it to you every day." Cynthia didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved toward the small kitchen nook, setting the flowers down on the table. Her hands trembled as she tried to organize her thoughts. Could she give him that chance? Could she really open herself up to the possibility of rebuilding their relationship, knowing how fragile it all felt? "I need time," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I need to figure this out for myself. I can't just jump into this with both feet. I need to know that I can trust you again, Chris. That you're really here not just because you feel guilty but because you want this too." Chris nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I want you to be sure, Cynthia. I don't want you to feel pressured." For a moment they both stood in silence. Cynthia felt a mixture of gratitude and fear. Gratitude for Chris's patience, but fear that maybe she would never be able to let go of the past. She wanted to move forward, to build a life with him and the twins, but the weight of his past, and her own, seemed like an unmovable force. "Okay," she said finally, looking up at him. "We'll take it slow. But that doesn't mean I'm making any promises. I'm not ready to make promises I can't keep." "I don't expect you to," Chris replied quietly. "But I'll keep showing you every day that I'm serious about this. About us." Cynthia exhaled slowly, her heart still conflicted, but a small part of her felt a sense of relief. Maybe this was what she needed. Time. Patience. Space to heal and rebuild brick by brick. Over the next few days, Chris continued to show up, but never in a way that felt too forceful. He was there for the twins, helping with their homework, playing games, taking them to their favorite park. Each interaction, each moment he shared with the boys, made Cynthia see him in a new light. Maybe he had made mistakes in the past, but she could see that he was trying to change. She too started to change. Little by little, she let down her guard, letting him into the small, quiet moments of her life. The trust, while fragile, was beginning to take root again. One evening, as she sat on the couch, the twins playing nearby, Chris joined her. This time there was no grand gesture, no flowers or elaborate promises. Just the two of them, quietly existing in the same space. "I'm glad you're here," Cynthia said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I'm still scared, but I think I'm starting to believe in us again." Chris smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "We'll take it one step at a time. Together." And for the first time in a long time, Cynthia felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this journey. They both had their scars, their broken pieces, but maybe that was what made them stronger. As the days passed, the future remained uncertain. But for the first time, Cynthia felt hopeful. They weren't perfect, and there was still much to work through, but perhaps they could still find a way to build something real. Together. The sun was setting on another quiet evening in the city, casting long shadows over the apartment. The twins had just returned from school, their laughter echoing through the apartment as they rushed to the kitchen to raid the refrigerator for snacks. Cynthia, still adjusting to the delicate dance of trust and distance with Chris, watched them from the living room. Chris had been coming around more frequently, always offering help with the boys or just being there when she needed him. And while Cynthia appreciated it, a part of her was still on edge. She hadn't made peace with everything yet, but she was trying. Slowly, she was beginning to let down the walls she had built around herself. But even as she opened herself up a little more each day, the fear of getting hurt again lingered. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Chris, the third one that day. "Just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" She sighed, her fingers hovering over the screen. She was tired of sending one-word answers. She was tired of pretending everything was fine when her heart still felt like it was on the edge of a cliff. "I'm okay," she typed after a long pause, just thinking about everything. She stared at the words, as if willing them to make sense. She hadn't told him exactly how she was feeling. How she was torn between letting go of the past and being afraid of trusting him again. How the fear of vulnerability kept her from fully embracing what they had. But something in her wanted to be honest, to let him see just how much this was all weighing on her. Her phone buzzed again, this time a response from Chris. "I get it. Take all the time you need. Just know I'm here. Always." She read the message a few times, the sincerity of his words stirring something inside her. She had seen that side of him more in recent days, the patient, gentle side that made her heart ache. But could she trust it? Could she trust him? It wasn't long before she heard the twins calling for her. She stood up, shaking off the restless thoughts that had plagued her, and walked toward the kitchen. The boys were sitting at the table, eagerly pulling out their homework. "Mom," Ezekiel said, his voice bright with excitement. "We learned about the moon today. Did you know there's a big storm on the moon called a lunar storm?" Cynthia smiled, her heart lightening at the sight of their enthusiasm. "No, I didn't know that," she replied, sitting down beside them. "Tell me more." As they chattered on about their lesson, Cynthia's mind wandered again, but this time the distraction of her boys kept her from getting lost in her thoughts. She helped them with their homework, made dinner, and tucked them in for the night. The familiar routine was a comfort, predictable, safe, and steady. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep, Cynthia sat alone in the living room, the weight of the day catching up with her. The silence was thick, oppressive even. It was as if the quiet itself was asking her to make a choice, to decide whether or not she could open herself to Chris fully, without the constant fear of betrayal. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Chris. Should I answer? She wondered, hesitating. She glanced at the clock. It was getting late, and she hadn't seen him all day. Maybe he just wanted to check in. With a deep breath, she swiped to answer. Hello. Hey. Chris's voice was soft, familiar. There was a hint of exhaustion in his tone, but also something else, something that made her heart beat a little faster. How are you? I'm okay, she replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Just thinking about a lot of things. There was a pause on the other end, then he spoke, his voice lower now, more serious. I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. I don't expect you to have all the answers right now. I know you're still processing everything, and I'm not trying to rush you. Cynthia's heart softened at the sincerity in his voice. She had always known Chris to be ambitious, driven, and often impatient. But this version of him, this patient, self-aware man who was willing to wait for her, felt like someone entirely new. I just need to be sure, Chris, Cynthia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to be sure that this is what I want, that I can trust you again. I've been hurt before, and I don't know if I can go through that again. Chris's voice was steady, firm. I know. I don't expect you to forget the past, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here no matter what. And I'll keep proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust. The simplicity of his words struck her like a wave crashing on the shore. For the first time in a long while, Cynthia didn't feel like she was walking on eggshells. The raw honesty of his statement made her realize that maybe, just maybe, she had been too focused on the fear and not enough on the possibility. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I'm scared to trust you again. I don't want to let my guard down, only to have it all fall apart. I get it, he said, his voice low and comforting. But I'm not asking you to let your guard down all at once. Just take small steps. Let me show you day by day that I'm here, that I won't hurt you. Cynthia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There was something in his voice, a calm, steady assurance, that made her heart soften. Maybe she had been too closed off, too afraid to let herself believe in the possibility of a future with him. I think I'm ready, she whispered, her heart racing. I'm ready to try. Slowly. But I want to try. There was a pause, a moment of quiet between them, and then Chris spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Cynthia. I promise I won't let you down. The conversation drifted from there, the words growing softer as they both found comfort in the steady rhythm of their exchange. For the first time in what felt like forever, Cynthia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held, but she was willing to try to take a chance on him, on them. As she hung up the phone, Cynthia looked out the window at the city lights below. The future was still uncertain, the path ahead foggy and unclear. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her fears begin to lift. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild. Maybe this time it wouldn't fall apart. And maybe the storm she had feared would pass, leaving behind a calm that they could both learn to navigate together. The morning light spilled through the curtains, gently waking Cynthia from a restless sleep. It was another day, but it felt different. Something in the air had shifted. After her conversation with Chris the night before, there was a quiet sense of hope, small but real. She had made a choice, one that both terrified and excited her. She was ready to try again. But as with any decision, the fear of the unknown lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder that nothing was ever simple. She got out of bed and stretched, feeling the weight of the day ahead. The twins would be home from school soon, and she needed to focus on them, on the things that mattered most. Yet in the back of her mind there was that nagging question. Could she trust Chris? Could she really open herself up to him, knowing everything they had been through? Her phone buzzed, cutting through her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Chris. "Good morning, Cynthia. I just wanted to check in. How are you feeling today?" A small smile tugged at her lips. He had been sending little messages like this for days now, gentle, reassuring, never rushing her, just offering his presence. It was both comforting and frustrating. She still wasn't sure if she was ready to dive back into the emotional deep end, but she knew she couldn't keep pushing him away either. "I'm okay. Just thinking like always," she quickly typed back, her fingers hovering over the screen as she debated whether to add more. Finally, she hit send and moved to the kitchen to start breakfast. As she prepared the morning meal, her thoughts turned to the last few weeks. Chris had been persistent in his efforts to be there for her, to show her that he had changed. It wasn't just his words, it was his actions that spoke louder. He had been patient, understanding, and above all present. Yet Cynthia couldn't shake the fear that still haunted her. The fear that maybe this was all just too good to be true. Could someone truly change? Could someone who had hurt her so deeply in the past really become the man she needed him to be? The sound of the doorbell broke her from her thoughts. She wiped her hands on a dish towel before walking to the door. When she opened it, there he was, Chris. His familiar smile softened the sharp edges of her anxiety, but a flutter of uncertainty still stirred in her chest. "Hey," he said softly, as though testing the waters. "I thought I'd stop by. I know you're busy, but I wanted to bring some breakfast. Figured the twins would like something sweet this morning." Cynthia couldn't help but feel a tug at her heart. He was trying so hard. Maybe too hard, she thought briefly, but she pushed the thought aside. The old Cynthia would have told him to stop, would have closed the door to protect herself, but this new version of herself, this uncertain, cautious version, wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him through. As he entered, she noticed the small gesture of a brown paper bag clutched in his hand. He opened it to reveal fresh pastries, croissants and muffins, still warm from the bakery. "I figured you'd like something light today," Chris said, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. "I know you're busy with the boys and all, so thought I'd help." Cynthia took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the pastries. It was a simple gesture, but the meaning behind it was clear. He was here trying to show her that he wasn't going anywhere. His kindness, his thoughtfulness, it was overwhelming, but also for the first time in weeks it felt real. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice catching for a moment. "The boys will love this." He smiled and glanced at the clock. "I should let you get back to your morning routine, but if you're free later, maybe we can talk? We still have a lot to work through, but I'm not rushing anything." Cynthia nodded, her heart torn. She was grateful for his patience, but she also knew that this was the true test, the moment when things would either fall apart or move forward. She needed time. Time to process everything, to sort through her emotions and her doubts. She wasn't ready to jump into anything just yet, but she was also beginning to realize that she didn't have to make a decision all at once. Could be slow. Could be small steps. Okay, she said, her voice soft but steady. Later. We'll talk later. Chris gave a small nod, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment longer than usual. Then he turned and left, leaving her standing in the doorway with a strange mixture of hope and fear. She closed the door, her mind spinning with thoughts. The feeling in her chest, this knot of uncertainty, hadn't completely unraveled, but something about today felt different. Maybe, just maybe, she was learning to trust again. One step at a time. The rest of the day passed by quickly. The twins were in high spirits, devouring the pastries Chris had brought them and chattering excitedly about their day at school. Cynthia, however, couldn't shake the thoughts racing in her mind. Chris had done everything right. He was there when she needed him, not forcing his presence but offering it gently. He was respecting her space, respecting her pace. And yet there was still a part of her that held back. Why can't I just let go? She thought as she cleaned up after the twins. Why is this so hard? She glanced at the clock again, and it was nearly time for Chris to come by. True to his word, he had respected her need for space. But now, as the time approached, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves settle in her stomach. Would this be another chance to see him in a new light? Or would she retreat again? When the doorbell rang once more, Cynthia walked slowly to the door. She was ready to have that conversation, but she didn't know where it would lead. As she opened the door, she was surprised to see Chris standing there, holding a simple bouquet of wildflowers this time. His expression was calm, almost serene, as though he was prepared for whatever came next. I thought you might like these, he said quietly, extending the flowers toward her. Just a little something to show you I'm still here. Cynthia took the bouquet, feeling the delicate petals between her fingers. Thank you, she said softly, unsure of what to say next. Chris stepped inside, but there was no rush in his movements. No attempt to fill the silence. He was letting her decide the rhythm of their conversation, the way it would unfold. I've been thinking, he began, his voice steady, about how much I hurt you, about how much I took for granted. And I'm sorry. I know it doesn't undo the past, but I want you to know I've changed. I'm trying to be better. For you. For me. For the boys. Cynthia took a deep breath, absorbing his words. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but there was still a part of her that struggled to believe it. Trust was fragile, and once broken, it wasn't easily repaired. I'm not asking for forgiveness today, Chris continued, but I am asking for a chance to prove to you that I'm serious about us, about making things right, one day at a time. Cynthia's heart fluttered, and she found herself at a crossroads. Could she take that chance? Could she let him in despite the scars of the past? She didn't have an answer yet, but maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start finding it, and that, she realized, was enough for now. The morning fog had lifted by the time Cynthia stood in front of the window, staring out at the city skyline. It was a quiet gray day, the kind where nothing felt urgent, but everything felt heavy. She was alone in the apartment, well, almost. The twins had gone out with a friend for the day, giving her the solitude she had longed for. But today that solitude felt more like a weight than a relief. She thought about Chris. His presence had become a constant in her life over the past few weeks. He'd been patient, kind, and seemingly always just a phone call away when she needed him. Yet there was a part of her that resisted it. A part of her that was scared of what might happen if she truly allowed herself to trust him again. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Chris. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night. I know it's a lot to take in, but I'm here when you're ready. No pressure." She stared at the screen, her fingers tracing the edge of the phone. No pressure. That was what Chris kept saying. And yet there it was, the pressure she put on herself. She hadn't felt this torn in a long time, and the constant back and forth in her mind was exhausting. Was she ready to move forward? Could she really put the past behind her and embrace what he was offering? Or was she just fooling herself, afraid of facing the truth? That maybe she wasn't ready at all? Cynthia set the phone down on the kitchen counter and walked to the living room, sitting down on the couch. She buried her head in her hands, trying to collect her thoughts. The weight of everything she had been through, the lies, the betrayal, the broken promises, felt suffocating. It was hard to imagine letting it all go, to imagine the possibility of rebuilding something from the wreckage. Her mind wandered back to the first time she had met Chris. He had been charming, confident, everything she had thought she wanted. But now, after everything that had happened between them, she was no longer sure of anything. The doorbell rang, breaking her from her thoughts. She stood up quickly, her heart racing. She wasn't expecting anyone. Could it be Chris again? She walked cautiously to the door and peeked through the peephole. It was him. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened the door. And there he stood, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. His expression was soft, gentle, almost apologetic. "Hey," Chris said, his voice low. "I thought I'd bring you something. I know you've had a lot on your mind lately. Just a little something to show you I'm thinking of you." Cynthia hesitated, the weight of her internal battle pressing down on her. She had told herself she wasn't ready for this closeness, this vulnerability. But as she looked at him, she saw something in his eyes. There was no impatience, no pressure. Just sincerity. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. He walked in slowly, almost as if he was giving her space to breathe, and handed her the coffee. She took it, unsure of how to feel. "Thank you," she said quietly, cradling the warm cup in her hands. It was a simple gesture, but it meant something. She could feel the tension in her body begin to ease just a little. "I know things have been complicated between us," Chris began, his voice hesitant, "and I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I need you to know that I'm serious about this. About us." Cynthia sat down on the couch, taking a sip of the coffee, trying to steady her nerves. She had to say something. She couldn't just sit in silence forever. "I don't know, Chris," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm scared. Scared of what could happen if I let myself trust you again. Scared that I'll make the same mistake." Chris sat down beside her, his gaze never leaving hers. He didn't rush her, didn't try to fill the silence with words. Instead, he simply waited, patiently, quietly, for her to find her way. "I know I hurt you," he said finally, his voice full of regret. "I can't change that. But what I can do is show you every day that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm willing to fight for us, for you." Cynthia closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he had changed, that the man sitting next to her was someone who would protect her heart, not break it. But the fear lingered like a shadow in her mind. It was hard to imagine a future without the weight of doubt hanging over her. "I don't know how to move forward," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I don't know if I can let go of everything that happened. It's not that I don't want to try, but I don't know if I can." Chris reached out, his hand gently resting on top of hers. "You don't have to know everything right now. You don't have to have all the answers. But I'm here. And I'll be here no matter what. We'll take it one step at a time together." She could feel the sincerity in his touch, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to lean into it. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take that step just yet, but maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to make the decision alone. Maybe she could take it slowly, one moment at a time, and see where it led. "I'm not perfect," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't promise that I won't mess up, but I'll try. I'll try, Chris." His smile was small but genuine. "That's all I can ask for." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling between them. The fear was still there, lingering in the background, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't feel quite so overwhelming. They were taking the first step toward healing, and maybe that was enough for now. Cynthia took a deep breath, her heart beating steadily in her chest. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a small flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make it through the storm and find something worth holding on to. "One step at a time," she repeated softly to herself, as if to remind herself that it didn't have to happen all at once. And as she looked at Chris, she realized that maybe she didn't have to do it alone after all. The days that followed felt like a balancing act for Cynthia. She had agreed to give Chris a chance, but with each passing day, her fear seemed to grow instead of shrink. It wasn't that she didn't want to trust him. She desperately did. But after everything they had been through, after everything she had put up with in the past, it wasn't that easy. It wasn't as simple as just forgetting. She found herself standing at the window of her apartment again, watching as the world outside seemed to move at a normal pace while she was trapped in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Her thoughts kept returning to the conversation she had had with Chris days ago. "One step at a time," he had said. That sounded reassuring at the time, but now she wondered if it was enough. What if one step at a time meant never really getting anywhere? The sound of the front door opening broke her from her thoughts. It was the twins, back from a day out with their friends. Ezekiel and Caleb's voices filled the apartment, their energy a welcome distraction from the storm raging in Cynthia's mind. "Mom!" Ezekiel called, running into the kitchen. "We're hungry." She chuckled softly. "I figured. There's pizza in the fridge. Go ahead and warm it up." As the boys scrambled to grab the pizza and settle down at the table, Cynthia took a deep breath and stepped away from the window. She still hadn't figured out what she was going to do with Chris. The pull between them was undeniable, but there was also a creeping doubt that she couldn't shake. She had spent years convincing herself that she was fine on her own, that she didn't need anyone to survive. But the reality was more complicated. The reality was that she had been lonely. And when Chris had come back into her life, offering something she hadn't realized she missed, companionship, warmth, a sense of belonging, it had been difficult to resist. But was that enough? As she prepared a quick salad to go with the pizza, her phone buzzed once again. She glanced at the screen and saw Chris's name. It was a text message. "Hey, I was thinking about you today. I know things are a bit tense right now, but I just wanted to check in. Are you doing okay?" It wasn't the first time he had checked in. His messages were becoming a routine, a quiet reminder that he was there, waiting for her to meet him halfway. And yet, with each message, she felt a little more overwhelmed. "I'm doing fine," she typed back quickly, hoping to keep things light. "Just busy with the boys. They're eating now, so I'm trying to get dinner ready." The message sent, but Cynthia felt no relief. She stared at the words on the screen for a moment longer before setting the phone down, almost feeling guilty for not saying more. Was she being unfair? The question haunted her. She had allowed herself to believe that she could give him a chance, but now she wasn't sure she could live up to that promise. She hadn't told Chris the truth, the full truth, about what had happened between them. She hadn't told him about the things she had been holding inside, the resentment, the betrayal. She hadn't told him that, at times, she still blamed him for how much her life had changed, how much she had lost. The twins finished their meal and went to their rooms to play, leaving Cynthia alone with her thoughts once more. The silence in the apartment was deafening, and it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Just then her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Chris. She hesitated for a moment, the conflict inside her stirring once more, but ultimately she answered. "Hey," she said, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed her anxiety. "Hey, Cynthia." Chris's voice came through the speaker, warm and familiar. "I was hoping we could talk. I know things have been a bit complicated lately, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. I don't want to rush you, but I also don't want to keep pretending like everything's okay when we both know it's not." The directness of his words hit her like a wave. She could hear the sincerity in his tone, but it only made her walls go up higher. The truth was, she didn't know where they stood. She didn't know if she was ready to talk about everything that was swirling inside her. "I'm not sure what to say," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I'm still trying to figure everything out, Chris. There's so much I haven't told you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more understanding. "I get it," he said. "You don't have to say everything at once. But I need you to know that I'm here no matter what. If you need time, I'll give you time. But if you're ready to talk, I'm listening." She closed her eyes, leaning against the counter as she processed his words. He was giving her space, but he was also asking for something more. And that something more was terrifying. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said softly. "I don't know if I can open up about everything." "I understand," Chris replied. "And I won't push you. But just know that when you are ready, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." His words lingered in her mind as they ended the call, and she found herself sitting in the quiet again, unsure of what came next. Chris was giving her the space to heal, but was that enough? What if, after all this time, she still couldn't let go of the past? What if she was just too broken to ever fully trust him again? The thought sent a chill through her. She could hear the twins in the background, their laughter cutting through her doubts. They needed her to be strong, to make the right choices for them, for their future. And yet she was struggling to even make sense of her own heart. As the evening wore on, Cynthia found herself wrestling with an unspoken truth. She didn't just have to rebuild her relationship with Chris. She had to rebuild herself first. She had to face the fact that, despite her best efforts, she hadn't healed as much as she thought. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready for this. Not yet. But there was a small part of her that still hoped that somehow, through all the mess and all the uncertainty, they could find their way back to each other. One step at a time.